Well, welcome everybody. My name is Deborah Conrad and I'm the Entrepreneurial Mindset Profile Product Director. A bit of a mouthful, but the EMP Product Director, and I am with the Leadership Development Institute at Eckerd College. Thank you for joining us today. This is the second of 4 of our virtual workshop series, and we'll talk more about the remaining ones after we finish today. Oh, we have another person joining us. Here we go. But before I turn things over to Margaret, just to have a look on that slide there, down at the bottom is a sample of the Zoom toolbar. And I'm sure in this COVID world we're now living in, many of you are already very well familiar, but just in case, on the bottom left, you'll see that mute button. If we do ask it possible to please keep yourself muted when you're not in conversation. There will be several times today that we'll ask you to unmute. To the right of that is where you can toggle your camera on and off. And we do ask when we go to breakout rooms that you do enable your camera so you guys are able to talk to one another and see one another. And if you would like to rename yourself, you're able to do that by looking for the participants button, and you'll see everybody who's in the meeting and you can rename. And lastly, if you have any technical questions or have questions for me while Margaret is speaking, you can open the chat box and write to everyone in the session or to me specifically. We are we're recording for training purposes. But other than that, without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Margaret.
Great. Thanks, Deborah. And I am really delighted to welcome you, all of you who are connected with us via this virtual workshop. And I am Margaret Cooley, Director of the Eckerd College Leadership Development Institute and Senior Faculty Member. And we're here to focus on igniting innovation when you need it the very, very most. And frankly, as I sit here, I can't think of a more relevant, vitally necessary topic than entrepreneurial mindset or entrepreneurial spirit, if you will, during this coronavirus era. So let's dive into the goals and then I'll tell you how we're going to proceed. I want us to start by thinking about the critical need to think differently right now. I mean, we are all in unprecedented circumstances and we need to change our mental models. It's really not just about adjusting to the harsh realities of our unique present, but it's about reimagining and reshaping the future. The future is going to be different. And so you're going to learn about the entrepreneurial mindset profile. You're going to predict your results, and I'll show you how to do that. You're then about halfway through this webinar, you're going to get the results of your EMP feedback report via email. And then you'll have an opportunity to share a few of your reactions in small breakout groups. And in case that scares you, and for some people that's what happens, I want you to rest assured you cannot look bad on this survey. So you don't have to be afraid of that. And it is useful, I think, to connect and communicate about it. And ultimately what we want you to do is to determine some action steps for moving forward, because in these webinars, we are all about valuable takeaways. And I would add, we're also about having some fun in the process. So fasten your seatbelts, here we go. I am hoping that you received the handouts that Deborah shared via email. One consists of 26 quotes. The other lists scales from the entrepreneurial mindset profile. But I want to give you 3 minutes right now, if you have those quotes in front of you. And I want you to read them. You'll have to do that at a fairly quick clip. But I want you to read them and circle your 2 favorites, the ones that just speak out to you. Oh, I like that one. It's pithy. It's funny. I resonate with that, whatever your criteria might be. And then the second deliverable, you'll notice that at the end of each quote, there is an abbreviation. And I want you to jot down the abbreviations for the 2 favorite quotes and keep those handy for the time when we return your reports, because there's going to be something that we want you to reflect upon where that's concerned. So I'm going to give you 3 minutes right now. And I simply want you to circle your 2 favorite quotes and jot down the abbreviations. Time begins now. So let's move forward. And one thing that I want us to contemplate together is why now? I mean, why is this entrepreneurial mindset so important right now? Well, I think most of you will recall that the word crisis in Chinese is formed with the characters for danger, what we fear, opportunity, what we hope. And in every crisis are the seeds for opportunity. And so I think that we experience the trauma firsthand, but we may fail to see the opportunity for growth. And that's where we want to go today. Because Jim Laurie, the CEO of Stanley Black & Decker, he said this very recently: never in our lifetimes has the power of imagination been more important in defining our immediate future. Because imagination is the #1 tool for innovation. So we've got to stoke it in ourselves and in our colleagues. We got to think fast. And here's the purpose of the EMP, as we call it, the Entrepreneurial Mindset Profile. It was designed to help individuals, and as you can see, teams as well, assess the degree to which they're using an entrepreneurial mindset. Now, please hear me now. I'll say this several times. This is not going to tell you you should or should not be an entrepreneur. It is not going to do that. But it is going to tell you the degree to which you are using an entrepreneurial mindset. And you can, of course, do that within organizations as well as owning your own business. So it leads us to the question, and I want you to use your chat here because I'd like to hear from you. How do you define mindset? And so I'd like you to chat in synonyms or your own definition of mindset. Thoughts and beliefs, outlook or attitude, the way you approach things, how my thoughts trend. Perfect. Exactly. Primary mental models. Yes, you got it. A way being governed by specific characteristics. You got it. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to first think about mindset in an area with which we are all familiar. And that is mindset about managing money. So we all have a mindset about managing money. Raise a hand if you are somewhat conservative in managing your money. You're careful with your resources. You're pretty safekeeping. That's interesting. I'm not seeing a lot of hands where that's concerned, but yeah. So, if you have that kind of mindset, we believe that mindsets drive behaviors. So in that case, you might find these quotes to your liking. The quickest way to double your money is to fold it over and put it back in your pocket. That amuses me. Every time you borrow money, you are robbing from your future self. Now, on the other hand, if you have a looser mindset about managing money, and I have to admit, much to my husband's chagrin, that is me. I do get something of a charge out of retail therapy on occasion. So these quotes are for me. You can't take it with you. Anyone who lives within their means suffers from a lack of imagination. So you can see what I'm saying, that mindset drives behaviors. And let me give you one additional example. This one was prompted by Dr. Jennifer Hall, who's one of the authors of this survey. But it made me think about my childhood. We lived in a 2-story house, and I adored that house. And my mother, my charming mother, had a mindset of efficiency. And so when something needed to go upstairs, she would simply place the item on a stair and collect other items throughout the day and make one efficient trip. Mindset of efficiency driving that behavior. So I want you to chat in. What kind of mindset would you have to go up and down the stairs every single time? What kind of mindset might drive that behavior? Type in a thought. What mindset would drive behavior to go up and down the stairs each and every time you had something to take up, rather than immediate results, determination, urgency, OCD. I'm glad the sense of humor is intact. Yeah, actually, I was thinking a mindset of fitness. If I want to get in my steps, I'm going to go up and down 100 times and think, yay me. And if I'm my efficient mother, I'm going to put things on the stairs. So that's how mindset drives behavior. Now we're going to take it to entrepreneurial mindset. Entrepreneurial mindset. I'd like you now to chat in one more time. Why don't you type in just one adjective that you would associate with someone with an entrepreneurial mindset? Let's think about your notion of someone with an entrepreneurial mindset. And I want you to type in at least one adjective that you would connect with someone that you thought, okay, they got an entrepreneurial mindset. So, yeah, getting steps in as well, I see that. So, innovative, individualistic, possibility, inspired, innovative, adventurer. Absolutely. Great words. Great words. I think you're going to find that these words will show themselves on your own entrepreneurial mindset profile. So, once again, is entrepreneurial mindset important? And I'm going to give you several pieces of evidence, but think about it in your own mind. So, an IBM study of 1,500 chief executives around the world was done several years ago. And they were asking these CEOs, what's the most sought after trait in leaders? And this was across 60 different countries and 33 industries. And the answer was, wait for it, creativity, the most sought after characteristic in leaders. And this was several years ago. So now let's fast forward to 2020. And this was done, this data, pre-coronavirus, but I think you'll see it holds up nonetheless. So according to the World Economic Forum, the three most necessary skills are complex problem solving, amen to that, critical thinking, yes, and innovation. There it is again, creativity. So I'm going to ask you to be creative right now, and here's what I'd like you to do. We need to find new, more sophisticated answers to old questions, my friends. And so something might come immediately to mind when you look at that question, what is half of 8? But I want you to find some new and different answers. I'm going to give you 90 seconds. What I'd like you to do is just for the first 60 seconds, just jot down anywhere as many ideas as you can come up with about what is half of 8. Then in the last 30 seconds, type some of those in so that I can read them on the other side. So you're going to write down as many answers as you can. What is half of 8 for 60 seconds? And then you have another 30 seconds to type in some of those ideas. Go now. Half of 8, what is it? So type in a couple of those answers that you're coming up with. Let's see what you got. Twice as much as 2. I like it. 4, all right, let's go there. Half 8, half ATE. That's great, Mark Johnson. And 2 by 2, double deuces, says Lisa. 1/2, 4 less, semi. Okay, works for me. You guys are good. And let me show you a couple of answers that other people have come up with. So, first one, the middle letter in 8. Half of 8 is a G. 730, half of 8. Now, if you divide an 8, the number 8, horizontally, in a 0, right? And if you divide it the other way, vertically, you get a 3 or an E, depending upon which way you go. And then if you think as one of you did of it in another way, ATE, then T is the middle letter. But as you can see, there are many, many answers, and we often stop with the first right answer and we don't go beyond. So here's what the authors said about why they developed the entrepreneurial mindset profile. They got a request from a corporate team, because this really works for entrepreneurs and corporate teams wanting to become more entrepreneurial in their mindset. But they asked, they were heading up an innovation project, and they said, please, can you help our team develop an entrepreneurial mindset? We know that's going to make a difference. And the authors scratched their heads, and then they thought, you know, if we want to help them develop their entrepreneurial mindset, we're going to first have to assess it. We need some sort of baseline to know where we're starting out so we can measure our success. They looked for a tool that would do just that, and they couldn't find one. So then they engaged in their own research, leading, of course, to a couple of conclusions. One is entrepreneurial mindset is not an either or proposition. It's not a single number like an IQ score. It's more like a profile of various traits and abilities, all of which are highly, highly valuable. So I'm going to ask you to chat in your answer here. You just have to chat, one number. Is entrepreneurial mindset either genetically determined, in other words, part of our makeup, it's hardwired, or two, it's 100% learned. Anybody can be entrepreneurial, it's skills-based, you can learn it, or some of each. Type in a 1, 2, or 3, please, right now, and let's see what you think. Okay, we have a unanimous vote here. And that's exactly what I would say. It is some of each. And in fact, we can move the needle on any aspect of the entrepreneurial mindset, meaning we can enhance our capacity, but it is easier for us on some aspects of entrepreneurial thought and behavior than on others. In other words, it's going to be a little tougher with the hardwired pieces, but it can be done nonetheless. And so it can with the skills-based. So the EMP does not, I want to repeat, does not tell you, yes, go be an entrepreneur or don't. It doesn't tell you whether you are or are not entrepreneurial, but here's what you will discover about yourself. It's going to plot your scores on 14 distinct dimensions of entrepreneurial mindset. And then it's going to compare those scores with those of a norm group of entrepreneurs, people who own or co-own their own business and think of themselves as entrepreneurs. You'll be compared with those folks, hundreds of them. You'll also be compared with a norm group of corporate managers, folks who do not own or co-own a business, they're within an organization, and they do not think of themselves as entrepreneurs. So you'll see where you stack up, and this will allow you to consider the ways in which you might leverage some of your strengths that you might not even have recognized, or how you can enhance one or more aspects of a less developed area. And we've got a development guide to help you do just that, which is pretty exciting. So our authors discovered through their research and their belief that there are 14 different dimensions. 7 are probably more hardwired, more genetic. And here are 3 of them, 3 of the 7. I'm going to focus in on risk acceptance. Now, I don't know, how many of you have at least 2 children? Raise your hand if you do. And I want you to think about, are those 2 children, if they have the same parents, because I'm talking same genetics here, are they the same in terms of risk acceptance, or are they different, quite different? So I'd like you to think about that for a second. I have 2 children, 2 young adult, wonderful kids, Brian and Aaron, and we went on a ski trip not long ago to Portland, Oregon. And my son is giddy with enthusiasm. He says, we're gonna ski all the Black Diamond slopes. We're gonna have a blast. And my daughter says, thank you very much. I'll stick to cross-country skiing because I will not put my body at risk for a few hours of fun. Now, those are 2 very different attitudes about risk acceptance, and I believe it's genetic. They're both our kids, same parents. So these are hardwired. And then there are other 7 are likely to be skills-based, easier to move the needle. And one of those I'd like to focus in on here, just 3 of the 7, is idea generation. I'm sure most of you are familiar with different kinds of techniques to help you generate more ideas, to become more comfortable, more adept at brainstorming, for example. And whenever I think of techniques for idea generation, I think of this study out of North Dakota State University. Get this, they had 2 groups of subjects, and the task was to generate as many ideas as possible about a specific topic. So one of the groups was primed to think as though they were 7 years old. 7 years old, mind you. The other group was not so primed. And what was so interesting about this study is that those who were primed to think as though they were 7 years old produced far more original ideas on a subsequent measure of creativity. So we're going to talk more about that childhood creativity in a minute, but something to bear in mind. So what did the authors do? They first hypothesized what are the significant dimensions of entrepreneurial mindset. And then, of course, they did their homework. They used a statistical analysis process to determine that each scale did, in fact, distinguish between entrepreneurs and non-entrepreneurs, meaning entrepreneurs would score higher on all of these scales than non-entrepreneur corporate managers. So we know that. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to walk you through the scales, and hopefully if you received the handout, you may have those in front of you too. If you don't, they'll certainly be on my screen. And I'm going to take a bit of time here, not a long, but I just want to make sure that you understand what each scale measures. And as I describe it, I want you to think, is that me or is that not me? So remember, there are 7 personality scales, hardwired, so to speak. We'll start there. First one is independence. Those who are high on independence like to be free from the control and direction of others. Want to be more autonomous, of course. Now this one is actually called, its full name is preference for limited structure. What that means, of course, is just not liking structure. People who are high in this think that too much structure really stifles their creativity and interferes with it in ways they can't abide. Nonconformity. Nonconformity means liking to stand out from the crowd, and folks who are high in this often play the role of devil's advocate, and that's a role we all need, especially right now. Risk acceptance, I mentioned that earlier, but those who are high in risk acceptance often feel that it's a greater risk not to take the plunge than to actually take the leap. And I read recently an article that suggested that entrepreneurs pray more often than non-entrepreneurs, which I thought was kind of interesting, and I'm not sure I can explain that, but apparently they do. And action orientation means taking quick, decisive action. I don't know how many of you have ever heard of Colin Powell's 40-70 rule for making decisions. When you make an executive decision, he says, if you have less than 40% of the available data, facts, information, you're making a pretty poor gamble. If you have more than 70% of the available facts, data, information, you may have waited too long and missed an opportunity. You don't have to have it perfectly. Passion. There's a man named Gary Vaynerchuk. He was an early investor in Facebook and Instagram and Uber, so this man is wealthy. And he talks about passion, and he says, you gotta love your game more than your game gives you. So in other words, even though he's very wealthy, it's not about the profit. It's not about the results. It's about waking up every morning loving what you do. And I think I could say that's true about me. I wake up every morning loving what I do. I'm blessed. Need to achieve, liking to excel at everything that you do. Now we're going to look at the 7 skill scales, and then I'm going to have you guess before you receive your surveys back. Future focus means taking that long-term point of view rather than simply putting out fires, which are always there. This one is so interesting to me. Those who score high on idea generation often say things like, ideas just bubble out of me. And I don't know what that feels like. Maybe that's true for some of you. One idea just spurs you on to others. I admire that greatly, and I don't have it. Execution, turning those ideas into action, got to have that. And then I'm going to take a pause on self-confidence because I want to make a comment here. So experts who write about developing adult creativity, innovation, imagination, they say it's not about developing their creativity as adults. It's about helping them to reclaim their lost creativity from childhood. Now, I don't know if any of you have children 8 and under, but most people would describe them as highly creative. I mean, sometimes they have imaginary friends, or they say outrageous things, or they badger us with questions nonstop that are just born out of pure curiosity. And I read someplace recently that the average 4-year-old asks 300 questions per day. That's a lot. And if you're if you're sheltering at home with that 4-year-old, that could get old. But the reason we lose that creativity, it's not that it's gone, it's that we are afraid of looking stupid. We're afraid of saying something that other people would ridicule. And the reason that's such a problem is because of this quote. many ideas grow better when transplanted into another mind than in the one where they sprang up. If I don't get my idea out on the table, you can't build upon it to make it transformational. It's in this exchange that our imagination, our innovation grows. And so confidence, I have to trust that you're not going to ridicule me, that you're not going to criticize me. Trust is a huge piece if you want entrepreneurial minded teams. Self-confidence, optimism, the belief that things will turn out well in the end. Who doesn't want a double dose of that right now? Amen. And persistence, that's dogged determination. I think I got that. And then this one is in italics, and I'm going to have you chat something in again. Interpersonal sensitivity. All right, I'm going to ask you to think about this before you chat in anything. Who do you think has more of that interpersonal sensitivity? Would that be entrepreneurs? If so, you'd type in E. Or would that be corporate managers? In which case you would type in CM for corporate manager, just to make it very simple. So who has more interpersonal sensitivity? E for entrepreneurs, CM for corporate managers. And I'm going to take a look at what you're thinking. CM, E, E, E. So we don't all agree. And any other thoughts? Well, I'm going to tell you, that's interesting. So entrepreneurs, then we got another CM, a true leader. Actually, yeah, I think a true leader does have some interpersonal sensitivity. That is my hope. But actually, entrepreneurs have less interpersonal sensitivity than corporate managers. I believe that's because entrepreneurs are so focused on the result that sometimes they let the interpersonal mind niceties go by the wayside. You know, they might be so persistent, so focused, so passionate that they may not pay as much attention. Now, of course, an entrepreneur who has interpersonal sensitivity is even ahead of the game. But those are the 14 scales. So what I'd like you to do now is I want you to either write down, or if you have that handout in front of you, I want you to guess the top 2 for you on each side. Which are your 2 best characteristics? Either write them down or circle them on your handout. And I also want you to write down the abbreviation that is by it, because that abbreviation stands for that particular scale. So take a moment to do that. Think about also where you think you're going to be lower. That is also interesting.
Sorry, just to confirm, are we picking 2 on either side, like 2 under personality and 2 under skill, or just 1 of each?
2 on each side, Christina. Thanks for clarifying.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Yeah. I'm very generous. I want you to have a lot of strengths. So as you think about it, I want you to look back if you did the quote exercise and see if the quotes that you pick were in line with some of the areas where you are higher. For example, I love Oprah Winfrey's quote about passion, about what excites you. And passion is one of my highest scales, for sure. But I also like one of the quotes about idea generation. And that is not me, but it's something that I aspire to. So it can either reflect the ones that you selected at the outset. It can either reflect something that you're high in, that's probably a strength for you, or something that you aspire to be strong in. Either way, let's reflect on that a second, because you're very shortly going to get back your surveys. But I'm going to walk you through a sample. And there are a couple of slightly complicated things here, so listen up. It'll take about 5 minutes, and then you're going to get your reports. So, of course, it's not going to say Chris Sample on yours. We hope that it will say your name if all goes well, and you're going to get it via email. So Deborah has not sent it yet. She will very shortly, but let me walk through it first. First, of course, there will be a list of the personality scales, the 7 of them, along with their definitions so that you can review that at any time. Then you're going to see your first graph. Now, know this, the green line, as it says at the legend at the top, is the norm group of hundreds of entrepreneurs, people who own or co-own a business. The blue line is hundreds of corporate managers who work within an organization and do not think of themselves as entrepreneurs. And the red line will be you. So let's analyze Chris' sample for just a second so you can think about how to reflect upon your own. We'll want to look for highs and lows. So of course your eye first goes to that need to achieve. You can see the red line, that's Chris' sample, is at a 4.6. Yes, that's higher than the entrepreneurs, higher than the corporate managers, and that's probably a strength. But what we are even more interested in is this. Which scores are higher than the entrepreneurial norm group by the widest margin? By the widest margin. So as you look at that preference for limited structure, that is higher by a wider margin than the need to achieve from the entrepreneurial norm group. So that is probably one of his best strengths. And I'll tell you this, people who dislike structure, they are often good in times of change or in times of crisis, like the era in which we are, because they can tolerate ambiguity really well. And so that, in fact, sometimes heightens their creativity. So then we want to look at some of the lower ones, and our eye first goes to that independence on the far left there. You can see the score is 2.0, and it's lower than even the corporate managers. However, I want to say a word about independence. Many of you may score low on that, and I'll tell you why. My score is particularly low there. I'm lower than the corporate managers because there are some items such as I'm most comfortable being a team player. I love teams. My work is all about teams. So that's going to make me score less independent. But is it a problem? No, I got to be a team player. However, you then notice what's lower by the widest margin? Risk acceptance. So Chris' sample may be a bit too cautious in moving forward with ideas. So we're going to look for relative highs and lows, and I want you to bear that in mind when you look at your own. Now, one of the things I like best about this survey is that there's 78 items, and it shows you each and every item on the survey and how you responded. Look at the column labeled self-score. Now, notice after the overall scale score, there are 5 items, and it says 5, 4, 4, 2, 3. And notice the scale at the top. It's a 1 to 5 scale, 5 meaning describes me well, 1 meaning does not describe me well. So I'm going to say this several times. Please hear this. The number under your self-score beside the items is exactly the number you selected in response to the items. Exactly. It has not been altered in any way. However, there's a wrinkle here. If you look at the 5th question down, I like to consult with others on important decisions. If I say, no, I don't like to consult with others, I would give myself a low score, and that would display independence. These questions are asked at times in different directions. So I like to consult with others on important decisions. A low score would reflect independence. The item right above it, I'm uncomfortable when expected to follow others' rules. Now, a high score would reflect independence. So in order to come up with a valid average score, that overall scale score, we do a mathematical adjustment in order to calculate that. You do not need to understand that. If you want to understand it, there's a paragraph at the bottom of your report that'll explain it. And it just says that to get that average score, we take the numbers in parentheses. 5s are converted to 1s, 4s to 2s, 3s stay the same. But let me repeat, you don't need to know all that. What you do need to know, unless you're interested, but what you do need to know is that the number beside the item is exactly the number you selected in answering the survey. And why do psychologists do such a thing? To make sure that you're actually reading the items as you go through. Now, beside the self-score, there are corporate averages, corporate norm score from the norm group, and the entrepreneurial norm score. You notice in each case there is an asterisk. The asterisk means that the score, corporate or entrepreneurial, is statistically significantly higher or lower than the self-score. So with independence, you could see that both the corporate norm score and the entrepreneurial norm score are significantly higher. Whereas with limited structure, you can see that the corporate norm score, entrepreneurial norm score are significantly lower, can go in either direction. So then we're almost there. You're going to see the skills scales and their definitions. And then you're going to look at a chart again. Now we're going to be interested in what things are particularly higher for Chris Sample. Now, once again, interpersonal sensitivity is higher than both the entrepreneurs and the corporate norm group. Now, we're going to exclude interpersonal sensitivity for the purposes of this for right now. Just celebrate the fact if you're high on it, that will help you no matter what you're doing. But we're going to exclude it for this analysis. In that, we're going to look for what's the highest score for Chris Sample by the highest margin. And it looks like he's got some strengths in self-confidence and optimism. But actually, my friends, go look at the left-hand side future focus and notice that that score is only a 3.6, but it is higher than the entrepreneurial norm group by the widest margin. So that's going to be an entrepreneurial strength. The lowest one is pretty clear, execution. This person may not follow through to a large degree. And then it'll show you the items again. Same thing. Remember, under the self-score, the items are exactly the numbers you selected. They have not been altered in any way. And then there are two links at the bottom I should point out. One is, ultimately, you can look at a debrief video by clicking that link. That'll just remind you of anything that you forgot. And beautiful tool, there's a link to a development guide, and this gives you specific tips for how you can enhance any of your lower areas. So that being said, you're going to, Deborah is sending yours out, but just let me tell you the deliverable. I'm going to give you 15 minutes to review your report. We'll have a clock on the screen so you can mind it. But I want, this is the deliverable. I want you to read through the whole thing, highlight to your heart's content, or just look at it on your screen, whatever you want to do. But we want you to identify the two scales, excluding interpersonal sensitivity. We're going to put that aside for now, on which you are most entrepreneurial. That is the two scales on which your scores are higher than the entrepreneur norm by the widest margin, just as we did before. Or if all your scores are below the entrepreneur norm, those which are closest to the entrepreneur norm. And the other thing you would identify are the two scales, excluding interpersonal sensitivity, on which you are least entrepreneurial. The two scales on which your scores are lower than the corporate norm by the widest margin. Or if your scores are all above the corporate norm, those which are closest to the corporate norm. We're going to keep these instructions up there. Deborah, have you sent the surveys?
I sure have.
Okay, pull those out, and we're going to have a clock on the screen that will show you 15 minutes, and then we'll come back together. Come on back, and we're going to talk a little bit, and then we're going to have you in breakout groups. So let's let everybody gather. It's certainly possible you may have questions, and there are a couple of ways to go about that. One, we're going to talk a little bit later about how you can, if you want or need it, have an individualized interpretation session. But are there questions that anyone would wish to pose now? Unmuting yourself, of course. Okay, let me tell you a couple of things. Here's our approach to high scores. Everyone has high scores. That is, no matter how low your scores were or how high your scores were, everyone has relatively high scores, and we're more interested in the relativity here than in the absolute number. Sometimes people are simply low graders for themselves or high graders for themselves. High scores may be considered strengths to be leveraged in pursuit of your goals, both personally or professionally or academically. And high scores might represent strengths overplayed. I'll give you an example where I'm concerned. I have a very high score in need to achieve. That means I'd like to excel at everything I tackle, but I overdo that. And my husband will say frequently, Margaret, don't let perfectionism be the enemy of the good. And he's right. So we're going to have you think about ways in which you might overplay some of your strengths. And test takers test takers, that's hard to say, should look for patterns and hypothesize about how these patterns might play out in their behavior. Now, options for addressing low scores. You might decide the scales on which you score low are just not relevant to your job performance or your place in the universe, and just forget it. I mean, for example, my score on independence is very low. Is that a problem for me and my job? Absolutely not. I'm going to forget it. You can also team with someone or more than someone with complementary strengths, and I recommend that highly. I'm low on action orientation, meaning that I can mull things over forever, indefinitely. And so I have two colleagues that are, I would say, they come to very quick opinions. And so I'll run things by them and they'll come up with an instant answer. And it's not that I'll do then what they suggested necessarily, it just spurs me on to more action. And they're very valuable in that way. You can certainly engage with an executive coach or work with an advisor. But hey, this is magic. Use the EMP development guide to find resources and strategies for moving the needle on one or more scales. As you may recall, a link from your survey goes directly to this development guide, and here's how it looks. Let me just explain. There's the cover, and then it has, for each of the 14 scales, a chapter, and you see the appropriate pages. So let's suppose I were low in execution, which I am. It suggests I read pages 33 to 35, and it'll look like this. It'll tell me how it might look if I did have a high score. What are the possible downsides of overplaying those strengths? And then it'll have 8 to 10, by and large, specific suggestions for development, as well as reading material and suggestions. So for coaching others, if you want to develop your team to have a more entrepreneurial mindset, or to develop you, this is an ideal guide. And you got that link and you can explore it. So the tips will continue, and then reading suggestions. Here's what we want you to do. We're going to give you about 10 or 12 minutes, and we're going to place you in breakout rooms. I would like you to take the plunge, take the risk, and go there. And unmute yourself and show your video if you're willing. I'd like you to just share a few reactions to your report. But mostly, specifically, I'd like you to share the 2 scales that most clearly emerge as relative strengths for you, and an example of a score, a scale, that you would most like to raise, bump it up, move the needle, and why. I'd just like you to share with each other. And we'll give you 10, 12 minutes. We'll bring you back and close it out together. So, Deborah, are you sending them away?
Right?
Here they come.
Well, nice to talk to you.
Welcome back.
Oh.
Did you have, how were those breakouts? How were the breakouts?
They were pretty good.
Very good.
Yeah, I thought ours went well.
I'm delighted to hear that. There's nothing like talking with other people about these concepts. And I want to just share a couple of things, and then Deborah's gonna wind up with us. But please keep in mind that there is no single profile that captures the ideal entrepreneur or the ideal corporate leader or student. No ideal profile. It's all contextual. So it depends upon what's demanded in your particular role. And so I hope you've had a chance to begin to think about how you can leverage your strengths in whatever role you're in. Now, one other thing. As we said, the richness and value of these results lie in the unique profile within an individual and organizational context. I do want to mention the team report, only because I think it's so interesting. So you can get a group report for a team. And for example, we did this with a corporate team, a sales leadership team of vice president and her 3 direct reports based in New York City. And they all took the report. Now, before they saw the reports, here's I think the richest piece of this process. Before seeing the reports, they looked at the scales, they learned about what the scales were, and they had to decide 4 or 5 scales that would be most important for their success moving forward. And as you see in green there, they decided on action orientation, need to achieve, execution, and persistence. Remember, this is all about sales. So then we showed them their report. So action orientation, need to achieve, execution, and persistence. When they saw their graph, look at how high action orientation is and need to achieve. So the first learning that they had was, yay us, we are scoring high in areas that we think are really important for us. And in fact, they were above the corporate managers on every single scale. And then they looked at the skills page, and what they found is, again, execution and persistence were the other two. Yay team, they could feel really good about that. We've got what we want in terms of the success of our team. However, then the next question becomes, but what do you think you need to work on? Now you might be saying, look at that interpersonal sensitivity score. That's not too, that's not too promising. We'll look at that in a moment. Self-confidence was a bit on the low side, and future focus. Future focus. So those were three things that they contemplated. And here's the beauty of the team report. So you get the report at the end of it, the group lowest score, the lowest scoring person in the group high score, the highest scoring person in the group, and then the group average, the corporate norms and the entrepreneur norms, and again, asterisks indicate a significant difference between that norm group and the self-score. So look at interpersonal sensitivity at the very bottom of the chart. We saw that that was pretty darn low. But one thing we could see when you look at the group low score and the group high score is there's quite a spread. That person who had a 1.8 score on interpersonal sensitivity was dragging the group down. So it wasn't quite as much of a team issue as we thought it might be. Self-confidence, there was quite a range too. One thing that was really interesting, if you can look for the scale, future focus, future focus. Now, this one was also lower, and the group low score was a 2. The group high score was a 3.8. Now that didn't sound so high, but notice that that future focus score, the highest score in the group, is significantly higher than the entrepreneur norm. And so what that means is somebody in that group has a future focus strength. So they asked the person to declare himself or herself if they were willing, and a young man said, that's me. And it turned out he was one of the more introverted players on the team. So they hadn't always intentionally consulted him. Now, when you got this data, you can say, okay, hey, when we need to contemplate future focus, let's tap into your mindset. Let's tap into your skills. And that was a wonderful recognition for them. And then they decided on idea generation just as a whole. They were lower than they wanted to be as a team, so they chose to get some training in that. So as you can see, the team report could have a lot of value for different kinds of folks. And so I ask again, is entrepreneurial mindset important? Well, even if you're an internal organizational person, there was a 2012 Deloitte study, polled 652 executives at US mid-sized companies. As you can see down on the bottom, these companies had annual revenues between 10 million and 1 billion. And they were asking these executives, does entrepreneurial behavior have an impact on your company's operations? And the results were these. Companies that saw themselves as entrepreneurial, notice the words in blue, creative, unique, innovative, willing to take risks, outperformed peer organizations in growth and productivity. And so, as I said at the beginning, we need to stoke creativity in ourselves and each other. And what does that look like? It means listening to new ideas, showing respect for kind of outrageous suggestions in these weird times, allowing job flexibility. Some people are more creative at different times of the day, embracing diversity, fostering trust, because people will not put their ideas forward if they don't trust you, and don't micromanage, for goodness sakes. That would be my advice. And so there are plenty of uses of the EMP, as you can see: team building programs, leadership development, research, academic, aspiring entrepreneurs, of course. And Deborah is going to talk you through next steps, but let me take the first one. Let's suppose you thought, oh, that was a really interesting survey, and I'm not quite sure I understand it fully, and I think I'd like to spend a little bit of time with an expert going over it, just for me. You can do that. Deborah will talk about, you would reach out to Deborah Conrad, and her information is on the screen there if you wish to explore that. But that certainly is possible. We have a whole cadre of experts, people who can do those individualized assessment interpretations. So that's that. It can just heighten and deepen your understanding. But Deborah, I'm going to turn it over to you. But first, I want to say thanks, everybody, for joining us. I mean, we are pivoting and making a lot of our services virtual. And so we're learning in real time, just as you probably are in your own homes or wherever you might be right now. So thank you so much for coming. And I'll turn it over to Deborah.
Thank you, Margaret. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Margaret, and thank you everybody for joining us today. If anyone is interested in certification, I would be happy to explain a little bit more about that, but if you would like to become certified as a practitioner to be able to administer this assessment to anybody, that is something that we offer about every other month via webinar. And you would get a $50 discount off of that. And the cost to do that does range depending upon whether you're, for example, a coach or consultant versus a university educator, or you work for government or nonprofit. So feel free to reach out to me for information on that. We also offer what are called the Entrepreneurial Mindset quote cards. So you got a little taste of those today in the form of one of the handouts with the abbreviations for the different scales. But we have physical cards and sell them by a pack that can be used with up to 14 people. So I can talk to you about those, as well as offering a facilitator kit that can be used if you're going to become certified and work with teams using that group report that Margaret just touched upon. But we would be happy to talk to you more about the instrument. Feel free to reach out to me. We will not be providing slides from today's presentation, but do note that on the final page of your feedback report, there are 2 URLs on that last page. One will point you to the EMP development guide, and the other to a 10-minute interpretive video that features one of the 3 authors of the instrument. And we will be sending a quick Google form evaluation right after we get off here. If you don't mind, it will take just 15, 30 seconds if you could just provide some feedback to help us continue to improve and offer you programs that are of value. But thank you so much for joining us. Hopefully we'll see you either next Thursday or the following. We have 2 more virtual sessions in our series. And I don't know, Margaret, if you want to advance, I think it's 2 more slides from here. It's got the website, there you go, where you would have registered for this one. So if you haven't, feel free. There's still availability and we hope to see you. Thank you so much.